Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Everything Cyber. This will be our 14th episode of Deep Dive Conversations and second with Jeevan. In this episode, we'll be going a bit further and looking at data-driven application security and how it can help your organization make quantitative decisions around not only maturing and growing your security program, but also helping you burn down risk. With all that said, it does come with certain challenges. You end up in situations where you're facing analysis paralysis or ending up in situations where you're cherry picking metrics. So in this episode, we'll deep dive into data-driven application security and look at some key points on how it enables organizations to mature and grow their security programs. Let's get right into the episode, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Everything Cyber. In this episode, we are going to cover data-driven application security, and with us we have one of our maybe favorite guest speakers, Jeevan Singh. Jeevan has been with us as a guest speaker in previous episodes as well. We highly recommend you check that one out and also get to know more about Jeevan as well as the awesome work he does. Those who do not know, I'll ask Jeevan, can you please give an introduction of yourself and as well as include what would be, I think, really interesting. What does your family think you do versus what you do?
That's a great question. So I'm Jeevan Singh. I've been in the software industry for 20 plus years. Done everything from software development, DevOps, did a little bit of PM, product management stuff in the past as well. I switched over to the security side maybe 8 years ago. Even as a software developer, I had a heavy focus on security. But yeah, I've been currently working as director of product security for a company called Twilio, building out their product security program so we can really burn down risk in general. So what does my family think I do? It was a fun one at the beginning when I got into software development because my mother thought I fixed computers, which was terrible because now everyone in the family wanted me to fix computers, their computer. So that was always unfortunate. But I think my kids think I'm a hacker. I'm trying to make sure that they don't. I'm like, no, I'm trying to prevent hacking from occurring. I think my wife probably knows the best what I actually do, mostly because I talk her ear off of the things that I'm working on and the fun stuff, things at least I find fun. She may not find it fun. She's at least a good sport and just nods her head whenever I talk. But very, very great support. It's an odd mix of misinformation from the parents to completely wrong picture from the kids to at least some support from the wife. So
yeah, that's always an interesting one, especially in those of us in cybersecurity, right? I'm sure all of you have gotten that odd request of, can you hack into Facebook and help me recover my ID? I can't get enough. But yeah, with us, we also have our regular hosts, Surya and Sebide. Welcome.
Hi guys.
Hey guys, happy to be here.
Today's one is a very exciting one because security, as professionals, we definitely operate on a lot of gut feeling at times that we see a system, someone mentions us that they're doing things in a certain way, and we instantly go, ooh, that doesn't sound right. That sounds a lot of risk involved. But like any other function of an organization, we definitely need to not just rely on the gut feeling, but also back it up with data. And that's what's going to be the focus of our talk today, is how we create a data-driven security program where we're not just telling people to trust us, but we're also sharing the hard evidence of why they should trust us, and based on the actions they have done, what kind of impact we have gotten. With that, I'll probably start a bit broad and cast a wider net and ask you, Jeevan, that what has your experience been with building out metrics for a product security program?
I think that's a great question, and it varies by different companies and the company's needs. So I remember earlier in my career, it was very basic things like sending the VP of engineering and the directors of engineering just very simple metrics of what's the trends for the number of critical, high, medium, low informational type of vulnerabilities. But I've seen it mature at larger companies where now we want to really figure out what is the risk. And that's what like any data-driven metrics program needs to be really about the risk itself and how do we actually burn down risk in itself. So we definitely have moved away from having very generic conversations. This is how many criticals we have in our system. But are those criticals actually critical? And should we have engineering drop everything and focus on things? So now I've very moved on to nuanced conversations where it's nice to have an asset inventory and mapping back those vulnerabilities, those metrics to an actual systems to see, hey, is this P1 valid P1? Are we afraid that someone from the outside is going to be able to find a remote code execution on this particular vulnerability? And a lot of the times it's no. These vulnerabilities are not on the internet-facing side of your services. So it's going to be really, really hard to actually get to it. So I think metrics itself, just having basic metrics is a good first step. But you want to have the right conversations with the engineers themselves so that you're actually focusing their efforts on risk reduction. And then you'll feel a lot better about your program and which way it's heading.
Thanks for that, Jeevan. Really, what hit home for me is, yes, you can define metrics, but also having that conversation earlier on with the engineers is a big piece of that. What has been your definition of data-driven metrics, and has that changed over the years from when you started building out programs from the different companies up to now? Like, what has that evolution, for lack of a better word, been for you?
I feel it is back to that generic to nuance, and it really depends on the maturity of the organization and even the maturity of the business units within the organization themselves. So there are some BUs that I chat with regularly that are much deeper. And then we have those, I love having the deeper conversations when we are actually talking about the metrics. And if there are diving even deeper into individual vulnerabilities, saying, do we really feel this is a critical or is it a high? And then having those conversations on how do we actually score or risk some of these things. So it's always a challenge when we're pulling in data from security tooling, because it provides their perspective on that vulnerability. It doesn't have the context that you have within your services and your systems. It doesn't know that this is an internal facing tool rather than external facing. It doesn't know that there's PHI coming in or no PHI coming into these systems. So having a strong asset inventory and having those, having a methodology, even if it's flawed, but having a methodology to say that, okay, when we see P1 vulnerabilities coming from our SAST and it's in these external facing repos, we're going to mark it as a P1. Or right or wrong, it's really up to you working with the engineering counterparts to make sure that those decisions are correct. But having that mapping makes it easier for us to have very focused efforts within those areas. But again, like having a metrics program is important. It doesn't matter where you start. Like start somewhere, even if it is a whole number of critical, high, medium, low informationals. That's a great start. The second, I would layer on the trends and the analysis of the trends. Like, are we burning down more vulnerabilities than we're coming in? And if we aren't, what's going on there? As again, we're really talking about risk. So we care more about the critical and highs than the medium, lows, and informationals. So if we see a lot more critical and highs coming in, let's do analysis to figure out why is that happening? Is it lack of training? Is there particular tooling that we're using that's causing a lot more of these vulnerabilities to come in? So once you have a good handle on the trends, then it's having the better conversations. So I remember working at an organization after Log4j happened, we finally got our tooling in a good place where most companies that I've worked at, it's really hard to integrate tooling across the entire ecosystem. It's just a hard problem to have. So we started off another metric. we started with coverage metrics. How much our SCA is covering within the organization, how many GitHub organizations and repos themselves. And once we had a good understanding of that, we noticed that, hey, we didn't finish fixing all of the Log4j issues. So again, it's a risk-based approach. We thought Log4j was a large risk. We had other controls to mitigate it at the WAF, so it wasn't too bad, but we still want to get rid of it just in general. So we created a dashboard to let engineering leadership know that we had a focused effort of reducing the vulnerabilities. And we slowly started seeing that trend. We started trending closer to zero when it came to that. So there's metrics within metrics. So we had our regular major metrics program, but we analyzed the data itself and said, these are the things that we want to focus on. And then we started driving those particular vulnerabilities to a better place.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And mainly the point around monitoring, since I'm coming from a security monitoring standpoint in regards to coverage, it's a pretty big point because you can only have metrics on what you can see. So that's a really important one from my standpoint. Just to tie into another part that you're talking about on risk, as you may know, risk is a pretty subjective topic, whether it be you're talking to some security folks or whether you're talking to some business people. So how do you balance risk, or how do you communicate, like, what is the level of risk between product security and business?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's always a challenging one because everyone has their own opinion on risk. There are a few different ways that we communicate risk. And I think I really like the model that we have at Twilio, where we have BISOs, we have business information security officers, business unit information security officers, where they sit really closely with engineering leadership, and they talk to them constantly about their security posture, also helping out the engineering teams with helping sales to get through that portion of it, but also really relaying that information. So what we do through the BISOs, we have great relationship with the BISOs. We work with them very closely. We have our data itself, and we sort of talk to them about what are the smells that we see within the data. So what feels like that it's really problematic, and where are our concerns with? I remember when we implemented our tooling program here at Twilio, first thing we did is we got all of our vulnerabilities into a good state. Good state as in it's in the system, it's logged, we're tracking it. And then we had all of our strong tooling coverage around it. And we like, okay, let's look. I love P1s. Let's look at the P1s and let's get those to a good state. And the first thing was that we had those conversations with engineering. And as we started reviewing those P1s, a lot of the things I looked at and I'm like, these are not really P1s. We're going to take one step back, where there are differences between risk and vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities in our mind is something that is quantifiable, something that you can actually remediate, an engineer can remediate. And a risk could be something greater. There could be a lot of vulnerabilities under a single risk. So let's talk about like Log4j was a great example. That's a vulnerability. We can patch it and engineering can do it. They can move on. And a risk could be that, hey, there's no service-to-service authentication between these two services. That is a risk that may happen. So I saw a lot of these risk tickets as vulnerability tickets, and engineers were concerned and struggling. How do I implement this service-to-service authentication across these services when I don't have a strong framework for building out the authentication mechanism that way? So first thing that we did as security is we looked at all the vulnerability tickets, the P1s, P2s, P3s, and made sure that we've cleaned it up so that they're all actionable vulnerabilities. Then we had the better conversations with engineering and talked about, okay, are these P1s actually P1s? Do we know if they're internet facing? Do we know if they have PHI coming through it? Are they in high value targeted areas of our ecosystem? Like if it's part of our comms business, which is a very large business, a multi-billion-dollar business within us, and something that maybe national, may be targeted because it's communications in itself. So those sort of threat actors may go against it. So having those good conversations with engineering leadership to make sure that we've aligned on the severity of these vulnerabilities, and then actually starting to remediate them. So within 1 quarter, we've cleaned up, we got rid of all the risks, put it into our risk register. We've got all the P1s that are actually P1s, and magic happened. We started seeing engineers actually pay attention to those P1s, and we drove them down, and all of them were within SLA. So which blew my mind, because engineering leadership, once you have a very clean queue, engineering leadership really cared about the data and the vulnerabilities themselves, and they started remediating things within time as well. So going back to that risk topic, having those established relationships with leadership, engineering leadership in particular, and having a roadmap on how to move forward in a good way that works for both security as well as engineering, it will help really ensure that you have that risk reduction that you're looking for in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that stands out. And something I'd also like to highlight as well is when you're having these conversations, it might be possible that the vulnerabilities or the risks might actually increase in the initial stage. And this will not be a case because the organization is more vulnerable, but it might be your detections and monitorings have improved. So if you have more coverage of your GitHub organizations, then it's most likely that the vulnerability count might go up. So it's an important conversation to have with the engineering organization and team and say that, hey, maybe in the first period of time or first amount of time, they might see an uptick, but it's not necessarily a representation that you're doing worse than before, but it might be a case of detections have improved, monitoring has increased. So there's that aspect.
You also hit a great part where you talked about risk reduction for a particular vulnerability. Like if I have a P1, we don't have to fully fix it. If there's a way to implement a control to knock it down to a P2 or P3, I would rather prefer that rather than trying to spend 3 months fixing it in completion. So the data, the metrics conversations that you have with leadership will help drive the better conversations that you will have with engineers themselves. Parts of our organization, once a week, they look at security vulnerabilities as part of their operational reviews. They really care deeply about security. So we have those great conversations about the P1s, P2s, and now P3s, and making sure that we're driving it into the right direction. So make sure that you have those regular conversations. It will help drive other better conversations in itself.
Yeah. And the more Jeevan speaks and we have this conversation, I have this realization that how foundational vulnerability management is to the whole data-driven aspect of security. Without having a solid vulnerability management program, a lot of this cannot be conveyed properly.
It's two parts of the same coin, because you can have the strongest metrics program ever, but if nothing's happening, what's the point? So whenever I do talk about metrics, I really tie it back down to risk reduction. There's no point me showing these metrics if nothing's going to be done with them. I have to tie it back to actual impact. What is the impact that we're having with the metrics in itself?
So we gotta move away from Excel, those Excel files of tracking vulnerabilities and implementing something proper. That's the message.
Just moving on to the next slide, metrics are awesome, as you heard from the last few questions that we had. But you can also end up in situations where you try to go in depth about a particular metric, and you can end up in a situation where you're basically paralyzed by the analysis that you have. So how do you avoid situations of analysis paralysis within metrics? And that's a pretty common issue a lot of people face when trying to use metrics and presenting that to different teams.
Metrics should be done in a way where it is bite-sized and digestible. Whenever I integrate a security tool into our ecosystem, I always talk about the crawl, walk, run, and sometimes I add the sprint. The crawl is that let's get the data in. I want all the data coming in from a tool. Say it's your SCA. Let's suck in all the data, and then let's create some dashboards. And that's it. And let's share those dashboards with security leadership as well as engineering leadership so that they know. Strong engineering leaders will look at it and start like, okay, I see a bunch of critical things. Let me start getting that working. Others may dilly-dally and not do anything, but that's okay. That wasn't the point. The point is just make the data available to those metrics available to the folks. Next one is walk. With walk, we will focus on the most critical of vulnerabilities that need to be actually remediated immediately. So there are some tools within SCA that will provide critical information, and they may say that there's a mature exploit in this particular area. So if you notice it's critical, it has a mature exploit, maybe it's also internet facing, create those tickets. It doesn't matter if it's manually or automated, generate those tickets. And the purpose of them is most engineering teams, they haven't flexed their patching muscle. So when they start getting more and more, it just they can just do things regularly at that point. So within the walking, I usually go from manual and then to a point that there's automated vulnerability ticket creation. Obviously, you need to have an asset inventory to back things up. And then your severity mapping, we talked a little bit earlier, where if it's internet facing, maybe it's higher. If it's internal facing, maybe it's a lot lower. So have that mapping in place. The run is usually have some sort of automation so that as for SCA, there's a lot of tools that automatically create PRs or actually can merge PRs as well. It's a little bit more risky because developers may not have tested these particular areas. It might cause some sort of failure and damages, but over the long term, it'll be better so that developers are not consciously thinking about security. They have the tests in place. They know that when PRs are being merged back into their main branch, things should theoretically be good and all patched up. And I usually add this sprint. The sprint is, let's prevent engineering from making mistakes. So if there are critical vulnerabilities they're introducing, let's block them at the PRs themselves. So let them know that, hey, there's a problem with this particular library or this particular code that you've written. Let's double click into it and see if we should do this or if there's a better way of doing this. So it goes very, very slowly, the crawl, walk, run, and potentially sprint methodology of it. It will help with the analysis paralysis because you're doing bite-sized every single thing with those metrics themselves. And it will help you actually focus those efforts that way. So I talked about one particular tool, but we can talk about the entire metrics program in itself as well, where focus on the most critical of vulnerabilities themselves in your ecosystem and do it bite-sized. Everything that you do it bite-sized. Don't overwhelm the engineering team. So I've been at organizations where someone's integrated one of their tools and they integrated all of the vulnerabilities. So we had 50,000, 70,000 tickets in the system. And when you have so many tickets, no one's going to care. So if you have a couple dozen to a couple hundred, people will care and they'll drive the vulnerabilities down. But if you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities, nothing's going to happen. So to avoid that analysis paralysis, do something, but do a very small piece. Get engineering regularly working with it, build their skills and capabilities that way, and then you'll start seeing that risk reduction. And sorry, I keep talking about the risk reduction and impact because that's the most important part for me.
Yeah.
Have you encountered in the engineering organizations, like, I think I'm misattributing it, like Goodhart's law, when something becomes a measure, becomes a target? So like they may say, hey, let's just fix only these 3 P1s and that's it. Have you encountered such a scenario?
We do all the time. We do have to negotiate with engineering because security is one of the very many inputs that they have. So if we disagree with them, if we have a line in the sand saying that, no, you have to fix these 6 before I'm satisfied, have those good conversations with them and better understand what their other requirements are. Say if they are working towards a feature release or if they're working towards a conference that we have to display this functionality, let's talk to them deeply just to figure out what is a safer way of doing it. Maybe we don't display this feature, or it's going to be in alpha or beta for a time before we actually release it to the general public. you'll have those conversations, say, okay, these P1s have to be fixed before they go GA. And so having those better conversations, it will happen. And that's part of our job, our journey as product security engineers, is that we have to have those conversations. We have to have those difficult conversations of what we think is important and when we need to get things resolved by as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like, not everyone just wakes up in the morning and thinks about security, right? And there's this a whole aspect of other things. Developers, they definitely have the toughest job in the house. Like they have not just security, reliability, observability, all these different groups trying to chase them. It's like the one parent that has a lot of kids and everyone is trying to grab attention. That's probably not the best analogy, but it's a resemblance of
in
that.
those situations, you have the older kids helping the younger kids. Maybe the more senior engineers or senior teams can help the other folks. That's another conversation for another day where that's
for
how
sure.
how I like building up my security champions programs, where you actually really work with some engineers that are interested in security and then have them help train other folks as well.
Yes. And as well as instead of just developers, if it's other people trying to push for their priorities, how can we bake securities in those, right? Like we have this massive collab with our platform teams, where if they're pushing this, let's say, platform solution to all developers, can we just make sure that that solution is secure? Then we don't need to then chase up all the developers. So those kind of collaborations and symbiosis definitely goes a long way. Moving on, in the same tangent of Surya's analysis paralysis, another aspect of data-driven security I wanted to ask Jeevan is metrics that do more damage than good. So are there any categories or type of metrics you think we should avoid?
Yeah, I wouldn't say metrics to avoid, but we could talk about like anti-design patterns when it comes to metrics. Like we talked a lot about the two parts of the coin where you have the data and then you have the impact. So you still have to marry those. We talked lightly about overwhelming engineering. So definitely get things in piecemeal. So don't overwhelm them and then ask them to fix all the things, because nothing is going to get fixed, nothing is going to get prioritized, nothing is going to get done. The other challenges that I've seen is working directly with the individual engineers themselves. We talked about engineers having a lot of priorities. You really need to work with engineering leadership and driving the metrics program at that level rather than at the team or individual level, because they don't have the autonomy in itself. I've seen, especially leaders of today, they do care about security. They also know that security will have a major impact on the bottom line. So SVP of engineering or a GM of a product is going to care deeply about security. So working closely with them, making sure that they understand the what's happening security-wise and having the reasonable conversation. We're not there to tell them to fix all of the things. Let's start building a muscle. Let's make sure that they're trending in the right direction, especially the critical and highs. And when you see that trending in the right directions, you'll naturally see the mediums start trending in the right direction as well. So the anti-patterns are definitely there, where you're not talking to the right level of folks within the engineering organization. You're overwhelming the individuals and engineers themselves with too many vulnerabilities. So we want to make sure that when we think about things, how do we drive impact? How do we actually do the risk reduction in itself?
That definitely stands out for me. And something I've noticed as well, even within job descriptions or even when like CTOs or director of engineering, security is definitely a focus for organizations. So they definitely ask and interview them and ask them, what are your viewpoints towards security? And it's no longer considered just, oh, you have a head of security or a CISO, but they also have to have that knowledge or have that viewpoint as part of their role.
Yeah, what I've really enjoyed chatting with engineering leadership in the last 3-5 years is that security is a non-negotiable for them. There are bigger security champions than I've seen in all my career. So working directly with them, making sure that they understand the impact. being honest with them. Sometimes it's okay to let SLA for one particular P1 slide in order to get a bunch of other ones fixed. So be honest with them, make sure that you have a strong relationship, and ultimately burn down risk. And that's all I ever care about.
Okay, I had a conversation last week about something similar where you go in terms of approaching engineering organizations, like an up then down up down approach. So pretty much speaking to the engineering org leaders and then now propagating that down. So it's not like I'm a top down, but starting from the bottoms up, then just going down again. So yeah, I resonate with that. Thanks for the conversation, Jeevan. We've really enjoyed listening to your story and your growth from application, DevOps, and then more towards of a security focused career, and now going into organization leadership. From your viewpoint, what do you feel that companies, organizations as a whole should be doing more or less of when it comes to security? And this is an open-ended question, so we are not pushing you towards a direction or pushing a product. We just want to hear what are some of the trends you're seeing, or what you think they should be doing more or less of from that standpoint.
I have a terrible diplomatic approach to this one. It really depends. It depends on the company. So an example would be when I was at Segment, we had a really, really strong ratio of engineers to security engineers. So, and because of that, we were it was 1 to 12 at one point. So we were involved in every single conversation, and we're everywhere there. Whereas at Twilio, we have a much more scaled approach. There's a lot more engineers. We have a strong ratio when it comes to our security engineering function, like cloud security, product security, enterprise security, but we're not able to go into every conversation. So I think what I would recommend for all companies is really think about a scaled approach. It doesn't matter if you have 5 engineers or if you have 5,000 engineers. Really think about scale in itself. And you don't have, at the 5 engineer, you don't have to do all of the things, but we talked a little about tooling integration, coverage metrics from that standpoint. Better understand where your security posture is. It doesn't matter if you're doing all the things, but just understand where your security posture is so you know if and when you should be doing it. So at a 5-person company, you're unlikely to get attacked as much as a 5,000-person company. So I do expect you to do a lot more things at a 5,000-person company. But if you knew the security posture that you have at a 5-person company, you'll know what to implement and when to implement it all along the way. So when we talk about a scaled approach, that is, we talked lightly about security tooling, making sure it has a good developer experience. We want to make sure it's integrated where the developers are. I typically don't like the IDE because it could generate a lot of false positives, but if you can do it at least at GitHub and the PRs within GitHub, the commits that you do, so providing the data there, making it a good experience. The developers, they haven't done any context change at that point. They can actually fix those things very quickly, and it's not a big deal. It's like linting in itself, and they can just move on. The manual stuff is important as well. The threat modeling is important, but you're not going to be able to scale threat modeling that easily without having a very dedicated security champions program. So as you grow larger and larger, and you notice that your teams are getting thinner and thinner when it comes to threat modeling, you really have to think about your scaled approach. So doesn't matter what size you are, think about scaling security, because ultimately engineering is always going to go faster than security, and you don't want to overwork your security team. You need them fresh and focused on most of the items.
Nice. On a more lighthearted approach, but I'd like to push further on that. What in the recent months have vendors been pitching to you, whether that's through LinkedIn or that's the organization?
The great thing about the economic downturn is that I've been telling vendors I have no money, and then they've just been ignoring me. So that's been great. But there's a lot of interesting things that are just floating out there. I'm a big fan of privacy. So there's a lot of interesting privacy products that are floating out there. A lot of security companies saying that they're into AI. I haven't seen one strong instance of it yet, but I'm looking forward to that. But in general, even using the tooling you have properly and appropriately, I think what I've seen in the industry is a lot more consolidation. So you see these larger companies say, hey, we can provide you a full suite of items. And instead of just that, like instead of having the best SCA, we can provide you SAST, SCA, DAST tooling itself for a much cheaper offering than having those single items. So that's been interesting, and obviously that's caught in the ear of a lot of organizations because we're all looking to save money during this economic downturn. So definitely been interesting to have those conversations in general.
Thanks, Abhinav, and thanks, Jeevan, for those points. Coming to ending up the conversation, and so do you have any parting advice specifically for Appsec engineers who want to start doing more with metrics? So where should they start, and do you have any tips or pointers for them in terms of the approach that they should take?
Yeah, my biggest one is just start somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just start somewhere and then slowly iterate on it. So we talked a little bit about just total number of vulnerabilities, critical, high, medium, low, informational. That's a great starting point. And then as the engineering leadership get more familiar with that, security leadership getting more familiar with it, add trends and do analysis on the data, and then figure out how to do risk reduction. But ultimately, just start the program and slowly iterate on it. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't go straight from metrics to risk reduction immediately. Take that steps, take that journey along the way, because the engineering team also has to come along for that journey. And you don't want to spring everything upon them at one time. You want to slowly build their capabilities and muscle up for fixing vulnerabilities, that actual impact. So just start somewhere, start slow, feed it to the engineering team as we go along, and then progressively get stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can move to a place where it is automation and we're more focusing on the testing side of things, where like the engineering functional tests, that we're not breaking them when we're pushing automated patches through. So that's where we want to get to, but just start somewhere.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, it's kind of like putting yourself in the direction to go, and then once you start rolling in it, you naturally start building metrics and skill set within that that'll help you communicate better, not just within your team, but also within other engineering teams themselves.
And on top of it, don't stop. Don't get to a point and say this is good enough. Continue, keep pushing the metrics and keep pushing risk reduction. So make sure you can have strong coverage and actually see trends going in the right direction. So don't stop as well. That's one of those anti-patterns where you're like, okay, I've done this project, let's move on. No, continue this program and make sure they get better and better and better.
Yes, this would be a good time to insert that yell above GIF of just do it. And he's very energetic. That'll be a good ending to it.
Yeah, something I'm guilty of is spending a lot of time, or even sometimes too much time, in the planning of what do good metrics look like, and rather sometimes you just have to kick things off, start this program, and and just start building as you get more information. Because so it's something I'm working on and improving more in that part as well. Thanks, Jeevan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeevan. It has been definitely a blast. Talking to you over this multiple episodes. It's like the cybersecurity or application security masterclass that I needed. Thank you.
Maybe
so
not.
much
Maybe not a masterclass. Maybe a diploma. There are a lot smarter folks out there.
Jeevan, do you have any events or anything coming up you'd want to know? You want the audience to know about? Sorry.
Nothing in particular, but I'll be presenting at Global Appsec in DC late October. if
Okay.
anyone wants, I'll be talking about foundational versus scaled programs. So if anyone wants to learn more about that, feel free to hit me up and we can dive deeper into that.
Great.
Yeah, thanks again. And super thanks to the audience, as always, for joining us and sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it. If you found this episode helpful, please do share with your friends and let us know, because we'd love to hear about it. And as always, looking forward to the future videos, and stay tuned, guys, for more. Thank you.